Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for your patience. We're going to start now. My name is Darryl Rock, and I'm the president of the local Vancouver East Federal Liberal Riding Association. I will be your host this evening and would like to welcome all of you to this event. With me right now on my far right is Russ Miller. He is the vice president of the Riding Association, and he will be introducing our guest panelists. Thanks, Russ. Tonight, we are here to have an open conversation with residents of Vancouver East on a very important issue, the legalization, regulation, and taxation of marijuana in Canada. Given the latest changes by the Conservatives who have decided to punish people who use marijuana for medical purposes, we believe that this is a timely discussion. The Liberal Party of Canada is the only electable federal party that supports the legalization, regulation, and taxation of marijuana. The current prohibition on marijuana ensures that organized crime receives a large and steady flow of income, which makes the public and our communities less safe. In addition, the Liberal Party of Canada believes that legalizing, taxing, and regulating the use of marijuana is the best way to ensure that we keep it out of the hands of our children and keep profits out of the hands of criminals. Tonight's event will be the first event in a series of open conversations that the Riding Association will be hosting with residents of Vancouver East. Our reason for hosting these events is simple. We want to hear from you. We believe that good representation comes from being open and engaging with the community in an honest and frank dialogue. The current Conservative government is doing a poor job of serving residents of Vancouver East. And without a voice in government, the issues facing residents of Vancouver East will continue to be ignored. Make no mistake, it is our intent, through hard work by volunteers here in Vancouver East and across this country, to elect a Liberal government in 2015. One that cares about the needs of Canadians and not simply the needs of a select few, as the current Conservative government does. Here in Vancouver East, your local Liberal Riding Association believes that we can elect a Liberal government. We believe that residents of Vancouver East want and deserve an MP that actually sits in government, not in opposition. We believe that having an MP from Vancouver East in government at caucus meetings with cabinet ministers will make a difference for residents of Vancouver East. How? As a government MP, a Liberal MP from Vancouver East won't have to write a letter to the minister. A Liberal MP from Vancouver East will simply take them aside at a meeting or pick up the phone and call them to deal with issues that concern residents of Vancouver East. As I said, tonight we are hosting an open conversation in our community so that we can better understand how our community feels about the legalization, taxation, and regulation of marijuana. We will be hearing from several guest panelists, each of whom is an expert in their own way, and will share with us their thoughts and insights on this very important subject. While they do not represent the Liberal Party of Canada, they do have a great deal of knowledge and expertise in this area and will help foster a productive conversation in our community. Following the short presentation by each guest, we will open the floor to questions and comments. This is our chance to have an open conversation. This is your chance to get your questions answered. Finally, before we hear from our first speaker, I would like to acknowledge members of the executive of Vancouver East. Can you stand or raise your hands, members of the Vancouver East executive? We do exist?
Some of us are. They're all in the back.
And I'd also like to say thanks to those who helped organize today's event. Russ Miller up at the podium, Stephen Irving over here managing our Twitter account and our live Twitter feed, which I'll talk to you in a moment, and Dylan McDonald, who is the logistics guy behind all of this, who's standing in the back, probably greeted you on your way in. Anyway, on that note about Twitter and tweeting, we do have a live Twitter feed if you want to tweet, and it's hashtag LPC Townhall. So any of you that do have a Twitter account and do want to tweet tonight's event, hashtag LPC Townhall. And on that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Russ. And I hope that we have an open, productive conversation. And I hope everyone enjoys it. Feel free to ask the questions you come here with the intent of asking. Russ?
Yeah, so I just want to echo what Daryl said. Thanks everybody for coming out.
Can't hear you.
This is a great oh, you can't hear me? I thought my voice was booming enough. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So thanks everybody for coming out. This is far and away a great event that we're holding here. Just based on the turnout and everything, it's so far it's a success in my books. It didn't even matter if you haven't asked a question at all. But so I'll just introduce the panelists. I'll start here with Steve, just because you're closest to him. So Steve's a member of LEAP. You've done a couple of talks with us before, coming at this from a law enforcement perspective. Mike, still can't hear me? Sorry, guys. I'll hold it. I'll unplug it. Yeah, so Steve's a member of LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. There were some brochures out on the front too, in case you guys had any further questions about LEAP and whatnot. So I don't want to go too in depth with everybody. I'll let them, talk about themselves. I'm sure they can do that much better. You've met Daryl. He's the president of our riding association. Enough said there. You've got Jody Emery over here. Jody's the owner of Cannabis Culture magazine. And, no standing ovation, nobody stood up. Yeah, Jody has just always been a steadfast ally in the fight for legalization and exposing the failures of prohibition here. So we're really happy to have Jody at another one of our events speaking. Dana Larson over here. He is I guess you were a co-founder of the Vancouver Cannabis. Sorry, I've got.
Yeah, co-founder of many things. That's one of them.
Co-founder of many things. He's also was spearheading the Sensible BC referendum last year, which was unfortunately unsuccessful, but still raised the issue loudly, I think. And to his left there, to your far right, is John Conroy. I don't know John that well. I've had some experience with these other four, but John and I have just met tonight. From what I've got on my notes on you, John, you practiced law since 1972. Part of, you were put onto Queen's Counsel in 1996, I believe. And you've been in court from every level, from the lowest levels up to the Supreme Court, if I'm not mistaken.
All day, every day.
All day, every day, never ends. Most notably, John was I guess, lead, what would you call it, lead litigator in the Coalition Against Repeal, for the MMAR. I'm doing a terrible job butchering all these people. I figured I'd let them talk to you about themselves.
One of the lawyers. One
of the lawyers, eh? I would say it a little nicer than that, one of the lawyers. But yeah, like Daryl said, we have a panel of well-spoken experts for your questions and everything. So what we're going to do is probably have 10 to 15 minutes for each of them to present. And then we want to open the floor up to kind of an unfettered Q&A. So you just put your hand up, and then we'll take the question. You can ask them from anybody at the table here. So without further ado, I'll open the floor back up to them. And I guess we'll start with John over on the far right there. And yeah, and then we'll just move our way back.
Well, today I was...
Do you want to go to the podium or do you want to...
It's better.
Yeah. The mic's kind of thick.
It's always hard for a lawyer to keep it brief, so I expect somebody will wave red flags or something at me if I'm going. Today I received an email, I can't tell you how problematic email is becoming when you get so many, but this one was from somebody forwarding me an article from the Huffington Post. It says, newspaper article accidentally sums up the marijuana legalization debate. This is a question that arose in Ohio. They asked if it was time to legalize in Ohio. And so the question was posed by the Dayton City paper, to the various workers at the paper who was going to take one side and print everything about why we should legalize, and then on the other side, those who were opposed. Nobody in the staff of the paper was prepared to write in the opposition to legalization. So the paper printed with one page that said all the reasons for legalization, and the other page was blank. And that was the Dayton City paper today. And so they say, accidentally, it sums up the legalization debate. There's nobody out there who knows anything about how to oppose it anymore, I suppose. So, as you know, I'm a lawyer. I've been involved in this issue since the mid-70s. I incorporated Normal Canada back in 1977, and so have been involved in the legalization issue since that time. So, legalization, regulation, decriminalization, these are all the words that you hear tossed around. The first one, of course, is prohibition, and so you all, I'm sure, understand that prohibition is one of the policy options. The other policy option is regulation. Some people talk about decriminalization and would include that, I suppose, in regulation. So the important thing to understand, in my opinion, is that it's not really about marijuana. It's not really about whether marijuana is a good drug or a bad drug. I mean, we get all kinds of examples of things in society that are risky and potentially harmful and all the rest of it. It's about prohibition. It's about how stupid prohibition is as a policy in relation to anything for which there is a demand. And it's the politicians, the people in power, who have to learn and understand that. They don't seem to learn the lessons of history about what happened with prohibition in relation to alcohol, and they've repeated these lessons. Interestingly enough, coming back to tobacco, they use education and try to, successfully in the province of British Columbia, to reduce people's consumption of tobacco. They didn't use the big stick of the criminal law. So that's the first important point, I think, to make, is that when you're talking to people, it's about a different policy approach, a regulatory approach, an approach that doesn't drive things underground, that doesn't take away from people the ability to use peaceful remedies to resolve disputes that arise in a marketplace. When I was doing the cross-examinations in the medical marijuana case, I got to cross-examine acting Corporal Holmquist, sorry, and he would point out to me that all these people who are involved illegally growing marijuana, they don't call the police when somebody breaks in and steals their stuff. You know, and often they roll up and they find that they're as involved in the illegal activity as the person who ripped them off. So that's why they don't call the police. But the people with medical licenses, not only do they have security systems and video security and all the rest of it, but they call the police. That's your first peaceful remedy that citizens have when they're involved in legal activity, is when somebody tries to rip them off or do something to them illegally, is they call the police. And so that's taken away from you in a prohibitionist model. The other parties, I think, talk still about, well, Mr. Harper, he suddenly, I think, realized that there were some votes to be had in the marijuana question, and so revived this, again, absolutely stupid traffic ticket type of a thing, where, you know, they say that this is so that they won't interfere with your civil liberties. Well, the reality is that few people, at least in British Columbia, get busted for simple possession unless there's an additional agenda on the part of the police. Usually they'll just take the stuff and confiscate it. And they complain about all the paperwork that they have to do if they proceed with a criminal charge. So make it easier for them is what the Conservatives want to do. Just hand out traffic tickets. They tend to forget that most people's interaction with the police is as a result of traffic tickets. And that's what often defines people's attitude towards the police, in my experience. So forget and explain to people when they say, oh, traffic tickets, isn't that in the right direction? At least it's not the use of the criminal law. it will interfere with your civil liberties more than the use of the criminal law in 2014. So the NDP talks about decriminalization. Well, we used to talk about that back in the 60s and 70s as sort of an incremental approach to changing the laws, because there wasn't much support. In those days, people were still going to prison for simple possession. And so decriminalization is a dinosaur theory. It's ridiculous to be still arguing that at this point. You know, what I give Mr. Trudeau credit for is he is prepared to stand up and use the word legalization. And he's prepared to understand what it means. He's prepared to tell people when they say, oh, you're sending the wrong message to your kids and all this sort of stuff. He's prepared to explain to them that under a regulatory model, it's a hard time for young people to get access to stuff. Much, much harder than going down to the local SkyTrain station or the local park to get whatever drug they want at any time. Regulation, usually you have to at least corrupt an adult in order to get the adult to go into the liquor store for you or something like that. So certainly not a panacea. People will always abuse whatever system or structure that you come up with. The whole idea is to try and regulate it and bring it into control. So that's the first point that I wanted to really focus on. I wanted to also say something about impaired driving, because a lot of people raise that question, and you hear what happened in Washington State and Colorado was they came up with, in Washington State, a 5 nanogram presumptive impairment level. And in Colorado, I think it's a rebuttable presumption. So, but the problem is that medical marijuana patients, people who use cannabis on a regular basis, like on the hour, every half hour even, they actually don't get impaired. They get into a steady state, and they're quite capable of doing all sorts of things that other people who smoke irregularly or with greater intervals, you know, they get high and shouldn't drive. Now, don't misunderstand me. Nobody should drink and use drugs and drive if their ability to do so is impaired. And that's what the Canadian law is. We have a law that is the 0.08, you know, 80 milligrams of alcohol and 100 milliliters of blood. That's limited to alcohol. That doesn't deal with drugs. They've got the magic machine in order to measure alcohol in your blood. They don't have it for THC or nanograms. It's misleading. So you have to point out to people that we have a law, and we've had it since time immemorial on the books in Canada, and it's called driving while your ability to do so is impaired by alcohol or a drug. And the police have been enforcing that law for a long, long time. What they do is they get you out of the car, they subject you to roadside safety tests, many of whom have been specifically trained in applying these roadside safety tests. And they also have the ability, and if you're going to add to the law, this is what I would add, or I recommend you add, is that they turn on the videotape that they have in their car or elsewhere to videotape the roadside safety test so that everybody sees and there's no dispute about exactly what went on, and maybe have a presumption against them if they don't use the video. In my 40-plus years at the bar, I've only had one case in which the police officer videotaped the entire event, and it's been, you know, very enlightening. It was actually very helpful for the defense. But nevertheless, you know, that would eliminate many disputes, and particularly types of disputes that could arise about roadside testing. So remember, it's your ability to drive that should be tested and not presumed to be impaired simply by some arbitrary nanogram level that they come up with. I've probably already gone over my 5 minutes. I would like to say, be careful when the issue comes up about hard drugs. I know in the Liberal policy, the position sort of is taken, oh, this is soft drugs, you know, we still think people should go to jail for hard drugs and so on and so forth. I was also counsel in the supervised injection site case. I acted for Van Du. And so I know all about that issue too, and I encourage you to learn something about that because We don't want to be sending addicted people to prison. We want them to get health care. We don't want to use the criminal justice system for them. We also want to get the drug dealers and organized crime out of hard drugs. And the way we do that is we take the profit out of it and we treat people who have healthcare problems with healthcare, not with criminal justice. And so it's important not to do to a heroin addict or a cocaine addict or meth addict what everybody's been doing over all these years to the marijuana users, and stigmatize them and make it that much more difficult for people to deal with this social problem. Our biggest problem at the supervised injection site is getting people in the door. The Vancouver police bring them. That's how progressive they've become. But they're so scared and so stigmatized about their use of the drug that they don't want to come. They don't want people to know that they've got these problems. They don't want to come to what they think might be some sort of government place where they're going to get busted. And that's what they've been used to all these years. So it's an important thing to understand that and be able to speak about that too. Very, very quickly then, in terms of the medical issue, over, must be 14 or 15 years ago now, the Ontario Court of Appeal upheld a case called Parker. And in that case, it was established that if you do not have a viable exemption for medical use for cannabis, then what you do is you put these patients in a position where they have to choose between their liberty on one hand and their health on the other. Pierre Trudeau, to his great credit, was the person who brought us the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Jean Chrétien was his justice minister. So I fought cases under the Bill of Rights for 10 years before I had the Charter. And I can say to you that the most important constitutional document that exists in Canada that makes us a civilized society is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. If it wasn't for that document, we would not have been able to establish that when they do that to a medical patient, to an approved medical patient, that we would not have been able to establish that that was violating their constitutional rights. Their right to liberty on the one hand, not just to be free from arrest and physical restraint, but their liberty to decide questions of personal fundamental importance in relation to their health care. And so they either have to break the law in order to access their medicine or go without. And so the court said, you have to provide, and you should understand the process. The court doesn't create this exemption. The court simply strikes down the law, sections 4, 5, and 7 of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, possession, production, trafficking, then suspends the declaration of unconstitutionality for a year, in that case, some are shorter, and it's up to the government to come up with a viable exemption. And so the government came up with the Marijuana Medical Access Regulations, MMAR. They were taken to court on a number of occasions because of how restrictive they were. The courts agreed with us, I think every time except maybe in Murdoch. And for example, we said to try and get compassion clubs and others to grow for more people so you wouldn't have so many grow-ups. The court found that you could only grow for one person, that was too restrictive. The government said, okay, you can grow for 2. We took them to court over having only 3 licenses in one place, again to try and expand it so there'd be fewer grow-ups. The government said, okay, you can grow for 4. So we always had this cynical response from this government in our efforts to try and do something. And now they suddenly decide after 13 years to take away the right to personally produce, or if you're unable to do so, to have a caregiver do it for you. And that was the right that the Ontario Court of Appeal decided back in 2001 and reaffirmed in the Murdoch case just last year. So that's how the medical issue has come about. Fortunately, as you know, Mr. Justice Manson in the federal court granted an injunction to basically grandfather, we hoped, the whole situation until trial. Unfortunately, though, he limited his order he grandfathered people as far as possession on the date of his order forward, March 21, And so people on March 20 and March 19 who had their licenses expired were put in an awkward position. There is a solution for them.
John, can I ask you?
Yeah, the solution is to go back to your doctor and get something under the narcotic control regulations to at least cover your possession. And if your production license was good on September 30th, it's still good. The government has appealed the injunction. We have cross-appealed in order to try and cover those people that fell between the cracks of his order. In our view, the judge should have done what I said a minute ago, found everything to be unconstitutional, sent it back to the government, given them 30 or 60 days to come up with a plan that covered everybody who was medically approved. People who are medically approved in Canada are entitled to a viable access to this as medicine. So hopefully that gives you an overview of what's been happening in the court situation. Thank you.
Thank you, John.